Good to see everybody here in the room. We made it here in good time, as did you. Thank you for being punctual, early even. We've got a few more minutes before we officially start at 10:15. We want to allow as many folks to get into the room. So make sure you're comfortable. Got time if you need to run in the restroom, but we'll get started right on time, 10:15. All right. Thank you for coming. I'm not going to read bios for the sake of time, because this time goes by pretty quickly. But I do want y'all to read, please. Yeah. So, 2 pieces.
I'm just going to read one, but it's a little bit longer.
Perfect. Yeah. And if we just go this way, so.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Hello, friends. I believe it is that time now. How y'all feeling? We're kicking off the Texas Book Festival, y'all. Come on, 30 years of the Texas Book Festival. What a time to be alive, truly, and to be here in Texas where, contrary to what some people might think, we love literature and books in Texas. We support writers and readers and literacy in Texas, and that is evident by all of you being here with us this morning. A couple housekeeping rules. Again, please make sure you silence your phones, please. And remember that they're going to start off with a brief reading, but we're going to continue a great conversation that began Thursday night at Black Pearl Books when they read there. Who all was at Black Pearl Books? Raise your hand. Okay, so you need to share your notes with the rest of the class. No. You will get plenty to take away, and then make sure afterwards you join us over the book signing tent, where they will be signing copies of their books. And you can also purchase those books if you have not yet in the Book People tent. My name is Amanda Johnston. I just jumped right into it, Amanda Johnston, I'm the founder and executive director of Torch Literary Arts, and I am so proud to be a community partner with the Texas Book Festival. They make space for us to bring in incredible authors from all over the country to make sure we are amplifying Black women writers as part of this important festival. Torch Literary Arts is a 501c3 nonprofit that amplifies and supports Black women writers across the diaspora, from emerging to established to National Book Award finalists, and everyone in between. We know that diversity matters, and having representation on and off the page is how we're able to see each other and build the community that we want to live in. So thank you for being part of that community. Round of applause for y'all. All right, so we're going to start with a brief reading, and first, please welcome Tiana Clark, reading from her incredible collection, Scorched Earth.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Good morning. This is my first time in Austin. I'm so excited to be here and to be with Donika and with Amanda and Brittany. I'm going to read a poem called Broken Sistina, Reaching for Black Joy. Yesterday, I was smashed with a rush of fresh honeysuckle from the greenway near my house where I walk every day. I've been trying to write a poem about buried Black bodies, but all I want to write about is Black joy and my pleasure and Black love and Black lives that don't end with viral death. So I've stopped consuming the news. I've logged off of social media for a break. Black bodies are buried in the stickiness of history. Everyday bodies become the next viral death. And yet each day I want to write a poem about pleasure. Black pleasure at the root instead of viral death. What name now? What Black litany? What Black elegy is repeated on the news? This cycle, Dante Wright. I don't know the details yet because I can't handle the details yet. But I'm mourning him still. This stanza broke the rules, so what? The stanza will break inside the form of honeycomb to suck the lyric into compression, reboot, restraint. The grief joy every day when I walk around Sylvan Park, near a broken track of burned Black bodies. But all I want to write about is Black joy and pleasure, 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 please. And Black love and Black lives that don't end with viral death. So I've stopped consuming the news. I've deleted all social media apps. I logged back in later, saw your name repeating as death media. Fresh honeysuckle at dusk, smells like sweet earth. Ripe bodies, warm floral notes, heady with romance and nectar. It permeates the day I walk over the bridge, where I often see a single blue heron, not social, standing stone still, stalking Richland Creek fringed with honeysuckle. Which reminds me of any Mary Oliver poem, such pastoral pleasures. I'm also still thinking about Claudia Rankine's blossoming blood list of Black bodies broken from police brutality inside Citizen on page 134. The memoriam fades into the sheer forecast of names we know will come. I picked the Sistina for its obsessive listing and twisting. I selected the Sistina to probe a problem I can name but can't answer. The end words are planets orbiting the math. Pleasure, death, honeysuckle, Black bodies. Social media, every day. Every day here are some plants and trees I've collected during my walks. I take a picture on my phone so an app can tell me what they are. Ginkgo, bristly locust, maiden pink, garden star of Bethlehem, wild pansy, bird eye speedwell, eastern redbud, Japanese cherry, apricot, peach, American holly, beefsteak plant, maypop, common bluewood aster, calico aster, eastern white pine, southern sugar maple, scarlet morning glory. Every day I walk past Dutchman's Curve, the eerie site of the great train wreck of 1918. Deadliest train wreck in American history, which killed 101 people, mostly African Americans, headed to a factory to make weapons for World War I. There were stuffed and rickety wooden cars in the front due to segregation, the front being the most dangerous spot on a train about to crash, while white bodies were in still Pullman cars in the back protected. But at 100 miles per hour, the wooden cars with Black bodies telescoped, splintered, and caught fire immediately upon impact with another train on the blind curve. The historian David Ewan describes bodies writhing in pain, bodies without heads and limbs, bodies unidentified and named. Quote, the African Americans that were on this train did not have a chance to survive given where they were. The cornfield on both sides of the track was trampled by many feet and littered with fragments of iron and wood hurled from the demolished cars. The dead lay here and there grotesquely sprawling where they fell. The dying moaned appeals for aid or speechless rolled their heads from side to side and writhed in agony. Everywhere there was blood and suffering and chaos. The Tennessean, June 10th, 1918. They asked local butchers to come help manage the gore and horror. Still 5 unidentified African American women and 3 unidentified African American men destroyed beyond recognition. The railroad masonry abutments remain. I touched them today. I went on a first date last Thursday. We both leaned into each other's mouths like 2 tipped tulips and just kissed each other at a bar called Answer, this as if it was an answer. It wasn't. But it was instinctual, sudden, and all pleasure. We kissed all the way down Murphy Road, walking back to our cars, constellation of our juicy hands everywhere. We kissed and groped, and I stopped obsessively thinking about death for a few moments, maybe even for a whole evening, which was the length of a tercet, an envoy sustained with pleasure, reaching for Black desire, reaching for the transcendence of pain, if possible. Is it possible?
Thank you. And now, Donika Kelly, reading from The Natural Order of Things.
Thank you. Thank y'all for being here this morning, and thank you, Tiana, for that beautiful, beautiful reading. Okay. So I'll read 2 poems, and the first one is called 16 Sinner. Last week, an insurrection. Yesterday, the second impeachment. And this evening of slurry and wind that makes the old dog wary, I call my grandpa, my mama's daddy, to ask why we call his parents' land 16 Sinner. He doesn't know, and he laughs, can fathom no reason but his daddy's drunk whimsy and charisma and the naming of those 20 acres of Arkansas backwoods, those pastures and good timber a mile down Columbia County Road 14. Nor does he remember how to call a hog. Nor does he remember who first called him Billy, as much his name now as Sam and for nearly as long. We leave what is forgotten behind us easily enough. Detour through what rough country he can recall. His Uncle Sonny Boy taking him west to live in Vegas. His grandma, Ma Gladys, in LA, rescuing him from Vegas. His baby sister shot and him 13, holding her feet at the hospital down in Haynesville as she died. His many jobs, his longest love, an outline, a sketch he's drawn before that I want to fix in my mind. I know my questions rarely resolve past trouble. I talk too fast, too high, am nearly unintelligible to him. Yet, we pass an hour this way. He offers some measure of a past we do not share, and it's easier to let be what is lost, to put down what I never carried. And soon enough, well, let me let you go. Soon enough, I love you. This you I know best in story, love best in flesh. Mm. And then I'll read one more. I never figured out how to get free. The war was all over my hands. I held the war and I watched them die in high definition. I could watch anyone die, but I looked away. Still, I wore the war on my back. I put it on every morning. I walked the dogs and they too wore the war. The sky overhead was clear, or it was cloudy, or it rained, or it snowed, and I was rarely afraid of what would fall from it. I worried about what to do with my car, or how much I could send my great aunt this month and the next. I ate my hamburger, I ate my pizza, I ate a salad or lentil soup, and this too was the war. At times, I was able to forget that I was on the wrong side of the war, my money and my typing and sleeping sound at night. I never learned how to get free. I never learned how not to have anyone's blood on my own soft hands. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. So on Thursday, we heard from you both, and Donika, you commented on vulnerability. And I think, it takes a certain level of vulnerability on the page in private before that's then shared, and then it's even harder if we're not practicing that in our regular lives. Mm-hmm. So if both of you could respond and just consider, when do you lean into vulnerability, and when do you decide to share that vulnerability in poetry?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a great question. I think the poem is such a constrained place that I feel more capable of touching subjects, touching memories, touching feelings that are much more difficult to talk about day to day, or much more difficult to address day to day outside of therapy. Mm-hmm. And in part it's because the space of the poem is small. And so it's like I don't have to be with it for very long. I can be like, oh yeah, I want to write a poem about my grandma, and then I'm in the poem for however long it takes to write it. And maybe the poem is, 20 lines. I'm like, oh, I'm mad at my grandma. Okay, I need to figure out what's going on here. And so the poems sometimes can show me where I'm having a feeling that isn't on the surface. Like the poem can surface a feeling, can surface a memory, can surface an idea that then shows me that I need to go do some investigation, right? So maybe that's talking with family, maybe that's talking with my sweetie, that's definitely talking with my therapist. And then I can come back to the poem, and maybe there are more poems there. Sharing it is a different thing, right? So the question of sharing work is one where I'm asking myself, is this art? Mm. So the practice and process of writing a poem doesn't have to be good, poem doesn't have to do anything except be a record of a practice. But if it's art, then I get excited. I'm like, this is doing something, this is reaching for something that's like beyond my solo experience. It's asking something of someone else, right? There's maybe something in here that I'm curious whether or not it resonates with other people. And so that sort of undergirds that impulse to share.
For me, when you asked the question, Amanda, it made me think about that Mary Oliver line, tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Mm-hmm. There's an exchange there, right? We all know when we're making friends or on a date, that first date, we're not showing any of our cards yet, right? Because we want a second date. But also we don't feel real love unless we do share that vulnerable part of ourselves, right? And then when we do show that vulnerable, broken part and someone accepts us there, that feels amazing, right? And so for me, the poem is that place where it is a shared act of vulnerability. I go to literature to feel less alone in the world. When I think about my favorite heart lines, it's those heart lines from poets that pluck that vulnerability within me. And I think about, with my students, when we talk about heart lines, I think about that thing from Barth of the Punctum, in the photography with that, there's something about the photo, the light, it pierces you, it bruises you in some way. And so I feel like with that sense of vulnerability, which is uncomfortable, but that sense of bruising also bruises me and connects me to the poem. I do agree with Donika. I think there's a difference between the poem that you write and the poem that you publish. I think I've heard Terrence Hayes says in that first draft, it's just him in his shadows. And I think that's a really important space. I think we get really caught up sometimes of like, oh, should I write about my family, this or this? And it's like, that's so way down the future. You gotta write to get that out of your body for yourself. And then there's a question of like, okay, now that I've reached this point, what is this? There are some ethics involved. But I think in those first initial drafts, I think it's so important. I also think workshop is a space. I think Matthew Selassie calls it an act of shared vulnerability. So I think it's crucial, not only to the writing, but also to the sharing in this space. And I think to me, there's something that feels more special after reading when someone comes up to me and they said, oh my God, you felt that? Or you put into language the thing that I've felt or experienced. Like I told Donika when I was reading her book, I was just cussing and yelling the whole time. I was just like how did she do that? Or she names it like when the line like I talk too much because I talk really fast, and I'm like that made me feel less alone in the world. Of like, oh, someone, so, I saw myself in Donika's lines, and it made me not only fall in love with her and her book, but it made me just feel less alone in the world. And so many of us are so lonely, and I think that's why I go to poetry, to have those moments of connection, real connection.
And I want to add something because I was thinking about the way that we often talk about vulnerability as like the things that are hard to say. And sometimes what's hard to say is I feel happy or I feel joy or is it okay? I saw a beautiful flower and I want to make a little record of that flower that I saw, or like I'm excited. Like, there's like a moment in your poem where it's like, here are the list of like these plants, and it's like, there's just like pleasure in knowing the names of things and that can also be a kind of vulnerability that doesn't come with the emotions that may feel more challenging, may feel like might carry shame, might carry trauma, might carry hurt, that also talking about or writing about what feels good, what feels pleasurable is another kind of vulnerability because it's saying, oh, in this time, I can still feel that, and I think we need that too. Like that's alongside all of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can share one more thing with that. It makes me think about this line from Gabrielle Cabaresi's poem, Praise House, the New Economy. Gabrielle has a line where they say, they're kind of listing the new economy that they want to share, and there's a line that's like, Mary Oliver, I love her, I really do. And it's just that simple thing of, I love her, I really do. And that doubling down on what you love, that also feels like vulnerability to me, which is also so close to sentimentality. And I love that chapter on sentimentality for Mary Ruefle and Madness, Rock and Honey. I was just talking about with my students of, how do you have heart with heft? We're so afraid, we're told not to be sentimental. I don't know what the hell that means. I don't know how you be a writer. To me, being sentimental is, you feel too much. And if you're not a writer if you don't feel too much. I ask my students, I go, who have been told you have too many feelings, you're too much? They all raise their hand, right? And I feel like, how do you have that heart and heft in your poem and that depth? And I think Gabby is one of those writers to me that does that so well. Like in her poem, Hammond Free Through Sister, that starts, on the days I don't want to kill myself, line break are extraordinary. I mean, it's like, whoa, you know what I mean?
Finding joy amidst all of the things that are happening in the world is a radical act, right? Your poem so brilliantly spoke to that. The war is happening. And I mean, if you're sitting in this room, there hasn't been a time that there wasn't a war happening. But still naming these delicious soups you're eating and enjoying and being with the dog and all of the life is still continuing, and I think that's important that we don't give up on that because it's what are we for then, right? Writing about joy, writing about love, leaning into that, doubling down on that, as you said, because that's what it's for, that's what it's about. But I know there can also be some, I'm speaking, generally here about writing when we have responsibility or feel there's a responsibility to the stories that we carry that are not our own as well. So like you mentioned, writing about family, do I do that or not? That's way over there. But it is somewhere in your mind when you're starting to write it. My uncle told me straight up, he said, you a writer? I said, yeah. He said, I don't like people writing about me. And the funny thing is now I tell that story all the time, right? So I've definitely got, he's gonna be in the memoir, right? But let's talk about that a little bit. When you are naming others, what do you feel there's a responsibility to carrying not just your story, but in that story is the story of someone else?
Go ahead. Okay. I think it's really difficult. I wrote a poem in my first book called Soil Horizon about my in-laws wanting to take a family portrait at a plantation. And I had no intention of publishing the poem, but there was like an internal contest at Vanderbilt, and I was told it wouldn't be printed. But then what they didn't tell me is that I guess they sent all the poems to the Academy of American Poets, and then it did get printed on the Academy of American Poets. But then I was like, okay, well, I won't tell anyone. But it got out, and it's very difficult, I think, to have a poet in the family for what you're talking about. I mean, and it was very, very difficult for me, and I learned a lot from that lesson. And the one thing that I learned about is, it's so hard when you're talking to people because you're like, well, there's a lyric guide, and like, no, if you're not a writer, you don't maybe understand that.
Yeah.
And it was really difficult to talk to them about it. But looking back, I have thought about what does it mean, the ethics of writing about someone else. And one thing that I have thought about is the role of self-implication. And so for this book, especially talking about my divorce, I made sure to make a vow to myself and still honor the vow I made to my ex-husband, that even though we got divorced, I still wanted to honor him. But I still was gonna write, my truth. But, I wanted to lean more into self-implication. And I always do self-portrait poems with my students, and I was like, oh, it's awkward, I don't wanna write about myself, it feels weird. And I was like, you should understand the ethics of that gaze.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so easy for us. I always think of that line from Natasha Trethewey in Elegy. She's writing about her father, and she was like,
I was that ruthless.
Yeah. And they're fishing, and she's like, I'd save this all for an elegy I'd write someday. I was that ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
But that is so important for the balance of the poem, right? To kind of call oneself out, just because as a poet, we're watching, we're observing. Sometimes I like to be around other poets because they see everything so clearly. And my favorite, one of my best friends, like, we'd get a reading, she's like, oh, I saw that you wrote down this, and I was like, why were you over my shoulder? Like, why were you looking? But it's like, we're looking at people very deeply. And so I try to think about that a lot when I'm writing about other people, is that role of self-implication. I kind of think it's like the role of acid in a dish, it cuts the bitterness down. And so I think that's one way to do it, but I do think no one owns your story. But there's a lot to braid into that. I am thinking though of writing an essay because I do think I was really young and naive when I wrote that first poem, and I do want to think about the role of my in-laws and the complications of that. And I think my next venture is into prose, to have that longer runway to do that.
Mm-hmm. So in my second book, I wrote a lot about my dad, who was an awful person. And I say that into, every time I say my dad, the next thing is he's an awful person, because I don't want people to feel confused. And I said it to his face, so he knows, like, we're very clear. There's a very clear, we understand the boundaries of our relationship. But in writing about him, there was a moment in which I was writing about his mom dying. Mm-hmm. And I felt in the writing how I was being cruel in the way that they had taught me, my parents had taught me to be cruel, right? A kind of carelessness, a kind of let me do what might benefit me the most. And I thought, oh, this actually doesn't benefit me. And part of my work is to figure out how I want to be in the world. So again, this goes back to what Tiana's talking about in terms of ethics. How do I want to be in the world? What do I want to carry forward? And so I went back and I was like, I can soften this, because I know that this was like this was like the original deep trauma of his life. And he made a lot of really horrible decisions after that, but I don't have to go in and rub salt in the wound. So in that book, I've talked with people a lot about, I've had lots of conversations about writing about my dad and the ways that I write about him and his many horrible actions. And so for me, the question is, what kind of relationship do I want to maintain with the person I'm writing about? And so, like, with my parents, I'm like, y'all can get whatever you get, because I didn't ask to be here and y'all did a bad job. So, like, if you wanted better poems, do a better job. I think, like, that's actually my energy. But I'm very direct with my parents about that. Like, that's not, but I'm also, at the same time, I also have the benefit of my parents not being readers. Mm-hmm. Like, they like to actually have the artifact of the book, but no one in my family is really like reading the work. Mm-hmm. And I also have the experience of being married to a memoirist. So I will tell you, worse than having a poet in the family is having a memoirist in the family. So whatever I do is much more opaque. She's like, let me slow walk you through memory. And, but it's been really lovely in this book because I've been able to bring in family, bring in friends in a way that is much more joyful. It's like when I read the poems, I get to read their names. I get to talk about the fact that, so in 16 Center, my grandpa's name is Sam, but everyone calls him Billy. And he doesn't know why. No one knows why. Someone probably just started calling him Billy, and they were like, all right, that's one of your names now. And I love that. Like, I love just like getting to hold that moment in the poem of like, just talking to my grandpa. Like, I have a record now of a conversation with my grandpa, which is a conversation we've had many, many times. And it feels good. And I'm really grateful to like have that sort of counter or balanced experience against having written about having been abused by my dad. And it's like, oh, there are people in my family who are good. I have friends who are wonderful, you know, who are always making me go on walks because they have to get their steps in.
And drink water.
And drink water. It's very important. Drink water, get your steps in, get hugs. And so it does feel a little bit different in this book than it has in previous books, writing about other people. It's like, oh, I can celebrate. And that's been such a gift.
I just want to add a quick note. Donika's also taught me so much about boundaries, healthy creative boundaries, and how to protect yourself. Because I remember when we came to Vanderbilt with your second book, and I think I asked you about the series, and you were like, well, I'm never going to read that poem. And it was a moment I was like, it was a way for you to protect yourself, and it was a moment for me. Sometimes I get asked to read certain poems, and depending on the audience or if I feel safe, because you said that, I was like, oh, that's a note for me that I'm allowed. Just because you've written that poem, that doesn't mean you ever have to perform that in front of anybody. And especially as a Black poet, sometimes when the room is, in my first book tour, when it's sometimes solely white people, sometimes I feel awkward of like this idea of also the performance of Black pain. And so I know for this book, I was reaching for a lot more Black joy, because in that first book tour, I'd go down to the hotel room and be like so emptied out and feel so weird and awkward. And so I've also been thinking about the aftercare of art making, which I think is also important, that just because you write those things, you also control the distribution of how that goes out into the world as well.
I love that. Absolutely. Nikki Finney said once, we carry all of our emotions, but Nikki Finney said, you throw the glass against the wall, you put the poem on the page, right? And I think that goes back to what you were saying about, get it out. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, here's art. Now art is happening, and that's different. But having autonomy over your work, and no is a complete sentence. And I wrote it, it's out there, you know, if it feeds you, great, but I don't have to perform for you. Those are two different things, two very different things. Oh, look at time is running by. I got like 10 more questions, but we're not going to ask all those because I'm going to save time for the audience to ask questions as well. But I think that's a great segue into self-care. I always, you know, we have this panel every year celebrating Black women writers on the Torch panel, and I know we deal with heavy topics. Nina Simone said, you know, we write about the times, to reflect the times. And I mean, the personal is the times, we're living in the times. But with all of that, I feel you, Nina, thank you. With all of that, we still have to take care of ourselves. So I think it is important for others to see that reflected too. So how do you take care of yourself while you're lifting these heavy subjects? And you talked about therapy, drinking water, taking walks. Those are real things, but how do you care for yourself?
You want to go first?
Sure.
I'm going to take care of myself.
Of course, of course. So the practice of writing is one of the ways that I take care of myself. It's the place in which I come into understanding about what I think and how, and it's something that I do that is not public. So I can write a poem anywhere. I can write a poem anytime, right? Like, it's a practice that is available to me. And so if there's something that's happening and I don't know who I can talk to about it, I can write about it because I don't have to share that with anyone, right? I can sort of come into understanding in a private kind of space. Alongside that, obviously therapy. I've been in therapy for 600 or 700 years. Like really since I was like 18, almost the entire time. I'm an external processor. I love talking. I have high talking needs, so therapy is very helpful for that. And it's spending time with family, spending time with friends, spending time with people who have known me so that I can come into a kind of understanding of myself that is fuller than like, oh, this is how I'm feeling right now. You know, it's like, oh yeah, like 20 years ago, yeah, I was 21 and that was a mess. You know, it's like that sort of like having someone who helps bound the passage of time, being with people who help me see like what the growth has looked like. That's one of the ways that I care for myself. And then I try not to work very much. Like I need a lot of time to rest. I need a lot of time to look out of the window. If it's summer, I need hammock time. I need time to not be working. So I really prioritize that. That is like my great ambition is to not work very much. So.
This is such an important question, and I guess I'm scared to answer it because the truth is I don't know if I'm taking care of myself well. In my first book tour, I ended up in the ER because I wasn't drinking water. I was grinding myself to death, and it was my first time having a tenure-track job through 3 and going on a book tour, and I was, you know, extremely blessed. I was incredible opportunities, but I also think when you come from a background of not having a lot of money and growing up poor, and you get all these incredible opportunities, there's that sense of like, I have to hustle, I have to grind, I have to say yes to everything. I'm not allowed to ask for anything. I just have to keep on saying yes. These are all unhealthy things, by the way. But I'm just saying, it took me a long time to learn how to advocate for myself. I'm still trying to figure that out. It's very hard for me to figure out what to say yes and what to say no to. I hate disappointing people. Perhaps I should say this for my therapy session. Danika's been so great. I actually talked to Danika for 2 hours. I was like, Danika, how do you do this and how do you do that? Danika's like, calm down. It's okay. Just relax.
But again, we're sort of, we have like some different things going on. I'm on the spectrum, so I'm like, I don't want to do that. That seems stupid. Why would I do that? The end. You know, I saw a post this morning from Tressie McMillan Cottom, and her partner said, either you disappoint other people or you disappoint yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, so I'm gonna give that to y'all. And I was like, oh, that's helpful. Someone's gonna be disappointed.
Yeah.
So I would prefer it not be me.
Yeah. You know, I'm writing actually a memoir about Black burnout. And, you know, in my first book, I wrote about Nina Simone and I studied her a lot. And I wrote a long piece for the Oxford American about her. And one thing about Nina Simone that I think some people talk about, but not a lot, especially for Black women artists. I mean, she felt very abandoned by the civil rights movement. And she was like a dried up husk. And it was actually 2 Frenchmen, 2 white guys that found her in this horrible state, like, in disarray, and she needed help. Yeah. You know, and they got her on laudanum, they got her help, and that's when you see the resurgence of her career with My Baby Just Cares for Me. And when I was in Paris, I went to one of the clubs that she used to like beg people to come and see her. I mean, this is Nina effing Simone that are begging people to come see her at this small little French bistro. And it just makes me think about my mom. I grew up with a Black single mother who worked 2 or 3 jobs my whole entire life. And I'm like, what is the legacy of that for my mom and for me? And so it's something that I feel so privileged to be a creative writer. And then I'm also still wondering the ways in which I'm also like, I have eaten the overseer, and I'm also still like doing that slave breaker work in me. I'll stop because I think I just need to say this for my therapist, but these are things I'm thinking about.
No, thank you for sharing that, because it's something that we all deal with. You know, we are living in a climate where no matter what, productivity, what are you doing? Even in your rest, capitalism is running that machine, and completely co-opted the very radical Black and feminist, womanist movement of self-care to be, now it's bubble baths and we have a product for you that you can buy. And it's always some hustle and some work. So it's very refreshing, and I appreciate you hearing both of you talk about your approach to it. And when it's not being successful, because that's where we can all learn better to say no. That's a complete sentence. I love that. I'd rather you be disappointed than me. But what I'm also hearing too is like, please remember, we are still, as we're seeing things erased and pulled back, it is hitting people of color and women first and worst, and Black women get the brunt of that. So we hear the stories, about Zora Neale Hurston, being lost to obscurity until Alice Walker went and found her gravesite and paid and put a headstone on it. That's happening to Black women in real time right now. So you might see someone get an incredible, achievement, an award or something, and then the system is still draining that person, and wanting it to leave them completely dried up and not cared for. So it is important that we care for ourselves, and when we can't do it, grace and love, see people and support them. And sometimes, that's understanding that they need space and time and rest. And pay them and support them too, and show up like you all did this morning. So thank you both so much. We're gonna open up for questions, but a round of applause for Tiana and Denise. Okay, so we've got time for audience questions. Please don't be shy. Look at this beautiful room. This is a great place to ask for a question. Come on, hands. There we go.
You talked about how, your writing, your poetry can be, very personal, and when you want to share it, it's the difference is when you want to publish it, it's art. How do you know?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. The thing that I talk about with my students is that we have to figure out for ourselves what our standard for art is, and the way that we figure out what that is through reading. And for me, it's, can I write something, or have I written something that gives me the same feeling or an approximate feeling to work that I find beautiful, to work that I find moving? So if my work generates in me a similar kind of feeling, I think, oh, this is one that I think might be good to share, might be ready to share, right? Does this register in some way alongside the work out of which my work comes, right? Is it resonating in the lineage in which I write? And so for me, that really is like, are the line breaks doing what they need to do? So is the content where it needs to be? Is the shape where it needs to be? Is the diction where it needs to be? Are the images where it, it's like the things that I care about in poetry, I use that to look at my own work. And so it really is like, does my own work clear my bar of excellence? Mm-hmm. And I get to set the bar. So it's not anybody else's bar. It's not, oh, someone else said this was good. Because people will say, at a certain point in one's career, people will say anything is good.
Right.
I think about Terrence Hayes, who is like, if he sent work anywhere, they would take it. So he has to be the arbiter of its quality. He has to know that it's good. And so part of the reason that I talk about this with my students is because they are looking for outside affirmation. Someone else tells them it is good. And it's like, someone else might not care about your dignity. Someone else might say, you asked the question, right? This won't be published. No, it won't be published. Mm-hmm. And they aren't like, but we will, they're not other people will not care for your work as much as you care for your work. Mm-hmm. So you have to be that first stopgap, right? Is it ready? And if there's any doubt, it's like, let me just hang on to it for a little bit. Time cures it, you know? Time sort of will harden it. And you're like, okay, no, it's ready now. It's ready now. I don't send out things that are new very often. I don't send out brand new work. Oh, I just wrote this. I'm gonna send it somewhere. It's like, that's wild. Why would I do that? I don't even know what it is. We will put this in the folder. We will circle back in 6 months or a year. Mm-hmm. And see what it looks like then, So I think there's also that element of time for me. It's do I still like it in a year? Do I still like it in 2 years? Do I still like it in 3 years?
I often tell my students that their poems have to ferment in darkness. Like kombucha, you gotta let it bubble and get weird without you. I think this is where revision comes into play. I think you're talking about those craft decisions. It's so interesting. Every year with my students, I always ask them, how many drafts do you do on your poems? And I was 1, 2. These are undergraduates. And so for me, I have one of my former students here, I'm very intense about revision. I'm very intense about line breaks. And so this is where that first initial draft, that might be very close to maybe some therapy, right? You're processing things, it's a mess, you don't know what it is. But for them, I think they really live in this kind of one and done. They're so used to publishing things and putting it out, and it's just live and go. And I really want them to, okay, you just got that out, but what is this? And so in revision, really, really breaking down for them different elements. And all of those, to me, it's almost like a lab experiment. Mm-hmm. Okay, what if you did a whole draft where you circled all your verbs, and you interrogated all your verbs? What's that going to do? What if you did a draft where you took out everything that was superfluous and the poem still meant something? And that's where I think it takes it out of that therapy, and this is actually a form of art, and it's getting out of what I want the poem to do. My ego, what is this poem wanting to be in the world? Because I want them to defend every decision that they make. Because oftentimes when I talk to my students in those first initial drafts, I'm like, well, what does this line mean, or what we're doing here? I'm like, I don't know, it just sounded cool. I'll never forget one time I was with Ross Gay, and I was an early baby poet, and he asked me, he goes, what does this line mean? And I go, I don't know. And he goes, you can write a beautiful line, but if it doesn't mean anything, he was like, why is it important to me? And I've always thought about that stayed with me. And so with my students, I think it's like breaking down different revision techniques and different elements and really getting into, they do so many drafts, they get so annoyed with me, but their final writing portfolios, they actually write a revision statement for each poem that they write, because I want them to track every decision that they're making to develop this rich relationship to their work, where it's not just, I'm writing a journal entry, put it to live journal and it's done. I love those. That they're a different thing, but really looking at it as a piece of art. And I do think time helps as well.
I love that. I just want to add too, for me, part of my revision process is reading out loud. I have to listen to the music in it. And just like practicing an instrument, you can hear when it hits the wrong note, when that break is wrong, when that, space, that pause, that enjambment, whatever is happening, it's like da da da, and you're like, oh no, let me come back to that. So just reading out loud and being comfortable with hearing it, because if you don't want to hear it,
Right.
say, why do I want to hear it? Why is that my jam?
If you find it boring.
Right.
Another thing that helped me too is I didn't know that poets lied until I was 25, and that was heartbreaking and also illuminating for me. I was like, wait, we can do that? And for me, that's another thing with my students, I think they're so attached to the truth. And I talk about how the lyric guide is a collage of personal and imagined experiences, and often for my students, I know, like, a certain situation may not be resolved in your life, but you can resolve it in the poem, or you can even reach into the speculative and imagine a resolution that doesn't even exist in this world, or you can travel in time and space to imagine whatever world you want to create. If you don't feel safe here, create a world in your poem that doesn't even exist. And I think opening up beyond just, those kind of things, it's an expansion, I think, for them as well, and for me.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. Yes, in the back.
I have a very specific question about the museum. Is this the beginning or the end? I love how, there's a lot of things I love about it, but how the speaker kind of morphs into the subject by the end of the poem, and how you arrived at that idea, and then once you arrived at it, how you navigated it through the revision process.
So this poem, The Bone Museum, is one that I wrote as I was invited to write in response to an exhibition at the Guggenheim. And so I went to the Guggenheim alone. I walked around. I made my little notes. I was like, oh, I like this. I might incorporate this. And then I left. I had like a very banal experience at the Guggenheim. And then I went back with my very tall, beautiful friend, Lovin Osman, the poet, Lovin Osman. And it got weird. People got weird while we were in the museum. And it was so markedly different. So she and I were walking around, and there's a refrain in the poem, is this the beginning or the end? And a man walked up behind us, and he was like, we were looking at a little video installation, and he was like, is this the beginning or the end? And Lovin and I looked at each other like, is that a real question? Because it's like clearly on a loop, right? But it felt like one of those questions, is this the beginning or is this the end? And Lovin was like, and like started to slide away. And I was like, it might be the middle. I was like, I couldn't say. I answered the question. But he kind of followed us for a little bit. And I was thinking about like how the two of us as Black women in the Guggenheim exerted a kind of energy, a kind of gravity that he seemed trapped in. And so I was thinking about the art, I was thinking about moving around the art, and then I was thinking about, as I was like composing the poem, this man who was just like so weird. And then I was like, am I not like that? Am I not always asking elliptical questions? Kind of creepy, like I am. So it's like a way of moving the man out of like a kind of specter who's threatening into maybe a kind of connection of like, well, maybe I too am like this, right? Like sort of walking and caught in assorted gravities that I don't quite understand. And the poem is it's one of my favorite poems in the book. It's very weird. But it's, so thank you so much for that question. But I hope that answers some aspect of it.
I didn't realize it wasn't also a piece of art.
Well, he's a piece of art now because he's in the poem. The poem transformed him into a piece of art.
All right, y'all. That is our time. Thank you so much, Tiana Clark. Thank you so much, Donika Kelly.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you all for coming. We are going to transition now to the book signing tent, so please meet us over there to get your book signed. If you haven't gotten your book yet, run very quickly to the Book People tent, get your books, and meet us over there at the book signing tent. Thank you.